We held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
I'd like to welcome all of you here and try and give you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish. We all have concerns about politics, and particularly the negative campaigning that goes on of late. In my tradition, we have a term that signifies evil speech. And I came up listening to my parents tell me when I said something I wasn't supposed to, that's evil speech. Better Outcomes, the nonprofit that I founded, is meant, our mission is to help people learn to find their common ground by using civil discourse. And in my mind, unless we learn how to talk to each other civilly, we're never going to find our common ground. And that's why we are doing this exercise tonight. So you'll have some idea of what we're talking about. Civil discourse is any communication, exchange of information in speech or writing, marked by or showing tact and polite consideration of others, even and most importantly when the parties disagree. It requires respect for the other participants. It neither diminishes the other's moral worth nor questions their good judgment. It avoids hostility, direct antagonism, and excessive manipulation and or persuasion. That's Better Outcomes' definition of what we're trying to achieve. As I was building this whole thing, and it goes back quite a few years, I started looking at all kinds of things, and it got to be a very interesting exercise taking a look at our candidates' backgrounds and what they're proposing to do. And it occurred to me that as much as we want political reform and government to work better and all that stuff, if we don't have good people representing us, people that can talk to each other and get things done, the system is so complicated that I couldn't even begin to figure out what the incumbent's day looked like. And I tried to go back and look at bills that were passed, and these guys really have very little control over, what actually happens in Congress unless they've got people working together. And we've got to get them shifted somehow or other from partisan politics, which is tying up the federal government, to being able to work things through in a bipartisan manner. And I hope that tonight will show that it is possible to do that. I also sort of got an idea that we've missed the point on when we think about politics. I bought a book called Politics for Dummies, and I found this in it. It says, politics is our system. It orders our lives. It determines who wins and loses when governments make decisions. It determines whether the future will be brighter or bleaker for our children. Politics is that unique situation in which you choose people to run parts of your life. By choosing the people who run your government, our government has all kinds of elected officials, from the nation's president down to the town animal control officer. When I did this first, and this model is based on something I did in Maple Heights, Ohio at the end of 2005, part of what I was concerned about was what was going on in the city and how the political candidates were reflecting on the city itself. You know, these guys are out there representing us, and what I told them was that politicians run city's government, the executive and legislative branches provide leadership and set a powerful example for the residents of the city. The way they cooperate and work together for a common goal determines, one, the results that they get, and two, the way the city, or in this case our state, is viewed by the larger community in which it exists. And with the way communication is, we're talking about the whole world at this point. I also want to be fair to the guys that are running for office. I heard on NPR a long time ago about a study that was done in London, and it tracked politicians' careers through certain phases. They start out, according to the study, as idealists. They get into office and they realize that idealism only gets them so far, and they become pragmatists. And then, if they can keep their heads straight, they don't become opportunists and they don't become criminals. And you got to look at people, what they tell you and what happens in Congress, and give them a little bit of understanding. It's a hard job. It's a much harder job than any of us, I think, realizes. And they're going to be putting themselves out on a limb tonight. We've got some very good questions for them, I think. And, you know, I just want to make sure these are guys that are going out on the limb for us. And, you know, we need to get our signal straight between us so that they're telling us what they can do and can't do. So there's no miscommunications as we go through the political process. The real problem, and the guy that pointed me at this isn't here tonight, but the real problem is not the politicians, believe it or not, it's the media. These guys have to play to the media, and it gets fragmented, it gets broken up, you know, they take things out of context, and we're trying to make decisions about who to vote for in what I think is an absolutely ridiculous situation. You know, you can't take a sentence out of somebody's speech, read it in the newspaper, and decide if this is the guy that you want to vote for. So I'm hoping that by doing, you know, what we're going to do tonight, it'll give everybody a slightly different picture of them and a more realistic view of things that can get done and what things that can't get done. If you take a look in your packages, you've got in there some things that I wanted to share. You've got, for one thing, the guidelines. The 2 pages are guidelines for this discussion. They're based on mediation rules that we use as mediators. And I've broken them up so that you can see there's a chunk for everybody. There's one for the mediator, so he's keeping things on track. And there's a section for the guys that are running for office. But I wanted everybody to see everybody's rules. I think that's really important. Then I've added a couple of things just as part of what Better Outcomes is going to try to do, if we can get this thing going here today. Listening skills, and I forget, there's another thing I threw in there. Oh, apologizing, that's the biggie. That comes out of a book called The 1 Minute Apology, which is one of the best books I've ever seen. But, you know, I wanted to share that with you. Take it home, use it, you know, whatever you want to do. Any comments, questions? Okay, we'll just move along then. I'd like to have our 2 candidates, Frank LaRose and George Ruzicka, come up, and John Birchler, who taught me mediation, and when I called him, he was more than happy to help us out. I know he can do a better job than I could ever hope to. John's going to be our mediator tonight. Would you guys come up, please?
Good evening, everyone, and I would like to say just a few words of introduction and thanks for this opportunity. First, to Lou Krause for inviting me to take part in this discussion and for the opportunity to be a small part of the democratic process in this congressional district. It's humbling, and I'm deeply honored to be here. I'd also like to thank both of our candidates for kindly being here. This is kind of a new idea that we're trying out. It's not a traditional debate in any classical sense. We're not going to be simply spouting positions and rebutting positions. We're going to be conducting a conversation. And I hope that's not putting people out of their comfort zone or out of their element, but this is the way that we communicate ideas. Third, I would like to express my deep appreciation to the rabbi and members of Temple Israel for extending the hospitality of your house of worship for this activity this evening. And finally, to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here when I know you could be watching LeBron tonight. This is a great example to me of people who are invested in the issues that concern you in your real life. And I thank you for the time and trouble that you've gone to be here this evening. Now, I'd like to start by offering each of these gentlemen about 3 minutes, and there's a fellow over here with a gong. I told him that I hate reducing every issue to, I hate putting us at risk of putting everything in bumper sticker terms. So I'm going to ask for people to be rather brief and rather pithy and rather to the point. This isn't a campaign speech. I'm going to ask for some comments on the various issues and invite people to talk about themselves and what they want to accomplish. Our first item of agenda is an opportunity for you simply to say who you are and what you're about as a candidate for this Senate seat. And both gentlemen have consented that we shall operate on a first name basis. I will say Frank LaRose, Mr. LaRose one time, and from then on we will be Frank and George Rosiska is Mr. Rosiska one time only, and then we're going to be George, and I'm Dr. Birchler.
That's how that works, huh?
But I can't even get my wife to call me that, so you can call me John as well. I'd like each of you, and Frank, I'd like to give you the opportunity to go first, to provide a brief summary of your career history, tell these folks what accomplishments that you're proudest of, how do you measure your success in the job that you're undertaking, what strengths and weaknesses do you think have an impact on your job, and why in the world did you want this job? And if you can do that all in about 3 minutes, then you deserve to be elected.
Well, thank you, John, and thanks to all of you for taking an interest to be here. I've always said that a campaign is like a year-long job interview, and all of you are my prospective employers. Well, you're my current employers, but I hope that you'll be willing to hire me for another 4 years. And so I believe that when you conduct a campaign, you get out there and you meet the people you work for face to face every day. You look them in the eye and let them look you in the eye, and you talk about your ideas, how you want to lead our state forward, and you ask for their vote. And so it's a real honor to be here, and thanks for your interest. Thanks to Temple Israel. Thanks to Mr. Kraus for putting this together. This is exactly the kind of thing that we need to be doing more of. We get too much questionable information through our computers, through our television screens, through our mailboxes. But in a local race like state legislator, like city council, like any of our local candidates, you should be able to meet your candidate face to face and find out what they're made of and whether they're the right man or woman for the job. I grew up here. In fact, I grew up about 2 miles from here. I'm from Copley Township, and For me, my high school years were spent working on a family farm in Copley, Bender's Farm over on Minor Road, and it was a great experience for me. And my other pursuit in high school was being a Boy Scout. I earned the rank of Eagle Scout, and that's something that is to this day one of my proudest accomplishments. I really enjoyed being able to do that. When I finished high school, I enlisted in the Army. That was my lifelong dream. I'd always wanted to serve, and I did it for 10 years. Really wonderful experience. I served with some outstanding men and women all over the world, and was able to have the privilege of serving my country. I decided to get out of the Army after 10 years because it was time to go to college. Went to Ohio State, earned a degree in business and consumer affairs. And while I was on campus, because I was a 27, 28-year-old college student, I was looking for something else to do in my free time other than what many college students do. So I decided to get involved in working on campaigns. I started volunteering for a congressional race, worked for another candidate, and really learned a lot about it and realized that it was something that all of us can get involved in. It's the barriers to entry are relatively low. And so although I had my degree from Ohio State in business, my mind was telling me to go home and earn a living in the private sector and get a job. My heart was telling me to run for office, and my heart eventually won out. So that's why I decided to run in 2010. Been serving now for 4 years. The work I'm proudest of is the work that I've done across the aisle when I've been able to work with my colleagues and bring people together to solve problems. I don't think that one party or the other has the corner on the market for good ideas, and I think that each one of us in the state Senate represent about 350,000 Ohioans, and every one of those people that we represent deserves a voice down there. And what that means is if you ignore one of your colleagues because they're from the other party, you're ignoring the 350,000 people that they represent. That's not something I'd ever be willing to do. I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do on things like redistricting reform, trying to change the way that the lines are drawn. And I didn't get to strengths and weaknesses. Should I continue?
Well,
okay. I'll share my, I guess because it was an interesting question that I've not been asked in this context before, the question about what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses. And it's good to have that kind of self-reflection. It's something that you don't always think about. I'd say one of the things that I learned in the Army is leading by example. Never asking a subordinate or someone else to do something I wouldn't be willing to do myself. The old example is you can tell your soldiers in the Army, in my old job, you can tell them to dig a ditch, or you can grab a shovel and you could say, come on guys, we're going to go dig a ditch. And I believe that the latter is a much more effective form of leadership. I would consider that a strength. I'm somebody who's willing to do what it takes to get the job done. Weakness? I think that sometimes I have a tendency to be a little bit too detail-oriented. People that work with me on my campaign could probably tell you that. And my wife tells me that I'm too conscientious for this job, meaning that I internalize the work. I have sleepless nights and agonize about did I research this bill most thoroughly enough? Am I doing the best work that I can? So.
okay, thank you. And now we're going to turn over the floor to Mr. George Rosiska, and same question, same opportunity. We might even extend the same extra time if you need.
Oh, I get an extra. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight, and I want to thank Temple Israel for this beautiful facility. I think this is the nicest one we've been to, isn't it?
I think so.
My career accomplishments and what I've done, after I graduated from high school in 1965, I hate to admit that, I might be the oldest one in here, I enlisted, no? Good mediator. That September I enlisted in the 179th Air Tactical Fighter Group, and I shipped away in December, so I spent 7 years in the Air National Guard. In 1969, I got hired as a firefighter for the city of Mansfield, and I stayed there for 30 years and retired in 1999. During that time, I spent from 1980 to 1992, I spent with I was employed by the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters, where for 8 years I negotiated fire contracts all over the state of Ohio. And the last 4 years I was the political director for them in Columbus. After I retired, I got got appointed to the Richland County Mental Health Board. And I really wanted to serve on that board because as a firefighter, I seen a couple instances where I just, people were, I had a woman come, after I was coming back from a fire, I was an engineer / driver, and she walked right in front of my truck and begged me to run her over. I never forgot that. I mean, I could just see her, she was right there. She said, please, run me over. And it wasn't shortly after that, maybe 6-7 months, that there was an opportunity. I was with the Richland County AFL-CIO, and they asked me if I would sit on the mental health board, and that woman's face just, I said, yeah, I want to get on there. And I became chairman. After 3 years, I was chairman, and that is my passion. That woman could have been my mother, could have been your aunt, you know, this woman was just, it just struck me, and it struck my soul. And my wife happens to be in the mental health business right now too, and it's something that I have, it has stayed with me. After that, I could only serve 8 years on there. I wanted some real punishment, so I ran for the Mansfield City School Board and got elected. And that was quite a deal, because that was right when the economy was turning down and Mansfield was losing jobs left and right, and we had a lot of work to do there, which wasn't pleasant, but we got through it. Probably my biggest accomplishment was probably 1983 and 84 when I was in Columbus. We passed the Public Employees Collective Bargaining Bill, and we had like a 2-year window to get it done, and that was my biggest accomplishment, although last year, or no, excuse me, 3 years ago, my opponent wanted to eliminate it. So that's probably my biggest accomplishment. Did you want me to get into my strengths and weaknesses?
1 extra minute, I think it's fair, yes.
Okay. My strengths are, I always keep my eye on the goal, and I use common sense to get there. I figure out solutions because there's always hurdles you got to jump over, and I just work hard and persist and obtain the goals. So that's I'm going to use that if I get to Columbus as the way I do figure out legislation too. Just work hard, stay persistent, and get to the goals. My weaknesses. Well, that was a tough one to come up with, but I am very impatient, and I found out if you take a deep breath and count to 10, that's how you cure that.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to ask the first substantive question of the evening, and George, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to answer first, since Frank was able to speak first. I'm going to try to alternate. And I'm going to ask about something that he alluded to in his opening statement, that anyone in any political office, in any government capacity, has probably any number of pushes and pulls on his or her time, energy, influence, whatever you have control over. People want you to use that control to benefit them. So the question is, to whom do you owe your allegiance as a public servant? Do you owe it strictly to constituents, financial supporters, party, or some combination? How in the world do you balance that in real life, in real politics?
Well, you do have to balance it. You first and foremost, you're beholden to the citizens of the 27th district. That's it. And you know, I've come from organized labor. I make no apologies about it. Organized labor will be a strong voice in in my background, or in my future. So I'm not ashamed of it. I've been with organized labor for 44 years. I think we fight for civil rights. We fight for equal pay. And that's what the citizens of this district want.
Okay. Thank you. Same question. When you have multiple pushes and pulls and tugs for you to do things to benefit me, who do you listen to?
Sure. And this is one of the real challenges of the job. I say over the last 4 years, this is one of those things that, any new legislator has to learn how to balance these things out because it's a human process. Legislating, making laws is work that's done by people that try to do their best work, but have to sometimes figure out how to organize their time and how to get to the best outcome together. The people that you serve are the people of your district. However, you're never going to get a unanimous opinion from the people of your district. And so there's a balance that, at least in my mind, I've tried to find, and I think that any person that serves in a legislative capacity works to find this balance as well. You have to do what you think is in the best interest of the people that you represent. But at the same time, you have to be true to yourself and your beliefs because you're the one who was elected to represent them. The simple reality is you can't please everyone, and those politicians that try to make everyone happy end up making no one happy, and they tie themselves in a knot in the process. And so you got to be true to yourself and what your beliefs are and your core principles. You've got to listen to the people that you serve. And I think I'd say this in conclusion. I've been struck by, at the federal level and at the state level, how many decisions are made based on ideology and not on research, not on thought and reflection. Too much ideology, not enough thought and reflection. And I think that it's important to put your ideology where it belongs and look at the research, review the numbers, listen to the people that you serve, and be willing to change your mind. We've got this problem where we vilify people that have a position and change it. To me, a strong leader is someone who's willing to reconsider their beliefs and grow as a person. When presented with new information, maybe something that you thought years ago is no longer so, because you've been presented new information. And so to me, changing your position on something is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of thoughtfulness. And those are the things that you have to consider before you make a decision, knowing that what you do impacts 11.5 million Ohioans.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I was just reading the other day, it's almost impossible to please everybody, although it's surprisingly simple to tick everyone off. I'd like to ask a kind of follow-up question, a follow-up issue, which stems directly from the first, and that is when you're working on a piece of legislation or a policy implementation, something that has an effect on the entire state. As we said, there are many pushes and pulls on you, and it may be that your colleagues and even the people across the aisle from you in the legislature may be offering quid pro quos. You support my bill, I'll support your bill. And I don't know how that figures into your thinking as you decide what's the best thing to do. So how does that fit in? How do you intend to work with your peers, especially the ones who are across the aisle? And how much freedom do you have to operate on your conscience or operate on the conscience of your constituency as you consider how to vote? Frank, I'll allow you to speak first on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I answer to my constituents, sometimes to my wife, and to, in my belief, in my personal belief set, I believe that I answer to Almighty God. I don't answer to my colleagues. I don't answer to a party boss. I don't answer to donors. And I don't think many of my colleagues do operate that way, to tell you the truth, although that's often something that people, when they don't like what the outcome happens in state or federal legislation, they often tend to use that. They would say, oh, well, you just did this because of a donor or something else. It's kind of a go-to for some people. But when you get ready to make a decision, you have to weigh all of the different components. I've said that there are no perfect pieces of legislation, other than when we're naming a stretch of road after a fallen hero, something like that. There are no serious pieces of legislation that are perfect. Most bills that you get are 70-30 or 60-40, and when you're presented with something that you think is more good than bad and doesn't cross a specific moral line that you have, then the pragmatic choice is to vote for it. If you insist on 100% ideological purity in your legislation, you are going to be the most ineffective legislator that ever lived. And so what that means is compromise is not a dirty word. Compromise is how statesmen and women solve problems, and you have to I think recognize that in a democracy, that's the way we solve problems. Sometimes that means that you give and take. Sometimes that means that you accept an amendment to a bill that if you were king of the world, you would have never put in that bill, but you're not. Mm-hmm. You're one member out of 33 on one half of the state legislature, and sometimes you have to be willing to accept compromises for the greater good in order to get something accomplished. And so to me, that's how I sort of weigh things out when I'm getting ready to make my decisions.
Okay, thank you. George, same question, and let me refine it just a little bit. How do you propose to talk with people across the aisle about the substance of what's on the table and about the issues at hand in a way that you can have a meeting of the minds and you can reach a compromise that works for everybody?
Well, back when I was down there many years ago, in order to pass legislation, you have to build coalitions. And I learned from one of the greatest coalition builders in the history of the state, Speaker Vern Rife. But nowadays, Frank's talked about compromise. The Speaker of the House of the United States, a Republican from this state, said compromise is a dirty word. I will never even use the word. So how are you supposed to talk and get coalitions when people don't want to use the word compromise? They won't use it. 3 years ago, this governor rammed through SB 5. We hired some people to go talk to him. And the gentleman come back after he talked to the governor, and this was his exact words. He said he's going to ram it down your throats. Now, you think these are people that want to compromise? Absolutely not. Until we get ideology, like Frank says, out of this, we're not going anywhere. You see it, how it is in Washington, D.C. It's just a logjam. And we pass great legislation here in Ohio. We get to carry guns now in the bars. When are we going to do something for the people? Until this turns around, we're not going to.
May I propose a follow-up question that's
Please.
That's an enlightening commentary from both gentlemen on a very difficult subject. If coalition building is important to getting anything done, and some people just don't want to build a coalition because they'd rather be, I don't know, devoted only to their party or devoted only to their constituency or devoted only to their belief, how do you talk to somebody in such a way as to say, no, compromise is not a dirty word, it's how things get done. It's not selling out, it's solution finding. How do you have that conversation? And let me ask you both to say about 2 minutes on that. How's that for loaded?
Sure. Well, I think that you have to look at something like this with your eyes wide open. There are people out there that don't want to compromise with you. Mr. George mentioned an example of a story that he's recalling. There are people that on certain issues don't want to compromise. There are people that never want to compromise. That's an unfortunate thing, and sometimes you have to make the decision that you're going to move past them and try to find some allies that you can work with. There are 33 members of the Senate, 99 members of the House, and I know that there are folks I can go to on the other side of the aisle and on my side of the aisle to solve problems. And then there are others that are more interested in scoring political points, making a point, putting on a bit of political theater and that kind of thing, and that happens. I believe that it has to start with relationships. You have to know one another as human beings, and through that relationship, you can build enough trust, and that trust can lead to the ability to solve problems and work together. And I'll give you an example. I serve as the chairman of the Public Safety Committee. It's a job I take very seriously. And my ranking minority member, a Democrat, a good man, is a person that I've taken the time to build a relationship with. There have been bills that have come through, and I'll ask him beforehand, how are your members going to vote? And he'll say, well, we're all going to have to vote against this. And so I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to have a party line vote in my committee. And I say to him, well, what can we do? How can we make that? I've got enough votes as a Republican member. My committee has a majority. I can ram things through all day long without one Democrat vote, but that's not the right way to operate. And many times, a small change, sometimes rather inconsequential change in my eyes, can bring others on board. And the bill gets made better through that process by compromising, by working to get things done. And then some people just scratch their head and say, but wait a second, you already had a majority. You didn't need to work with the Democrats. And I said, they had a good idea. Why wouldn't we work together? That's how you do it. It's about people talking to one another to solve problems. It's no more complicated than that.
Thank you.
Well, I agree you have to work together, but as Speaker Boehner said, compromise is a dirty word. Have you heard one Republican leader come out against him and say that was wrong? I haven't. I didn't hear it.
It was wrong.
Well, are you saying it tonight?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a little late. Is that? I suppose a lot of you read the Cleveland Plain the other day. Have you seen the picture in the paper of the editorial debate between the governor and Mr. Fitzgerald? And how the governor wasn't even looking at it, how he disrespected the Democratic candidate just because he don't like him. You think these are people that really want to compromise and get things done? It starts at the top. They're very arrogant. They don't care. And they don't care if they don't get nothing done. When are we going to get to a vote on minimum wage in this state? It's not going to happen. When are we going to get a vote on raising some funds for mental health? It's not going to happen. It's just, we're at a log jam, and it's going to stay that way until we replace some people.
Okay, thank you. If I've heard one thing here, it sounds as if it's going to be useful to get beyond party line affiliation, and it's going to be useful to get beyond people's simple position, to find out what they're really interested in. And this is an idea that comes to us from the Harvard Negotiation School. Don't tell me what your position is. Tell me what it is that makes you interested in that position, and then we can work on it. And that way, compromise and change can be achieved. Let me proceed to the next question so that we don't get too far behind here. George, I'll ask you first. Will you introduce and or support policies or ideas that depart from your party's customary way of doing things? And how will you respond to your party and gain the cooperation of your peers?
Well, yes, I would, but what is the what is the problem?
I know we're talking in very general terms.
It's pretty general. Yes, I would. I guess
Because
my
it's
answer
going
is-
to happen.
Sure. I'm not opposed of doing something that my party isn't in favor of, but I probably wouldn't do anything that the residents just make the residents of this district suffer. So that's number one. What concerns the citizens of this district, and how do you go from there?
Okay, so getting back to the first question, you owe your primary allegiance
Correct.
to the constituency
Correct.
rather than to the party or to same party peers in the state house.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Democrats, you gotta understand, we fight for the underprivileged. We fight for we're interested in a minimum wage. We're interested in funding schools. We're interested in job development. All things that will never get done in this state as long as we have this loggerhead that's going on now.
Will you introduce or support ideas that depart from the party line, and how do you handle pushback within the party when you do so?
Not only will I have, and on numerous occasions, I've stood up for what I think is right, even when it's not the party line. I've introduced legislation that was not supported by any Republicans, in fact, at least in my chamber, but it was what I thought was the right thing to do. Perhaps because of my independent nature and my willingness to do what I think is best for my constituents, I had a primary opponent this spring, and an individual that ran against me because, won't put words in his mouth, but he thought I was not a good conservative Republican. I challenge him on that. I think that I am, but I'm also someone who doesn't take his marching orders from any party boss, and I think that Democrats have good ideas, I think that Republicans have good ideas, and I think that we can work together to get things done. It's just not about trumpeting a certain party banner and saying that that's the only way to do things. There are knuckleheaded things that Republicans have done over the years, and there are knuckleheaded things that Democrats have done over the year, and you can count on it that trend will continue. Both parties will have dumb things that are done, and it's up to open-minded, thoughtful individuals to call their own party out on it when they're not in the right, and the other party from time to time, and to do so in a respectful and civil way.
Thank you. And you have alluded to one of the primary rules, in my mind, of what is productive dispute resolution, what is good, what's good, healthy, positive conversation. When the conversation begins and ends with, you're not liberal enough, or you're not conservative enough, or whatever other labels people throw at us, it's hard to know what to do with that. When we try instead to speak about the ideas, here's what I think about a minimum wage, here's what I think about funding schools, and let's talk about the substance of it, then you can avoid the labels. And that, to me, is one example of good civil discourse and dispute resolution. Let me ask you to follow up on that. What's your idea of good dispute resolution, civil discourse? How do you have conversations that actually get somewhere instead of finding out who's got the biggest supply of mud to sling?
Sure. Well, I think that one of the main things is that it's good to debate ideas. It's not good to debate people. It's not good to question someone else's motivations. I think that that's done far too often in the world of politics, where instead of having a thoughtful conversation, and maybe even a heated conversation when that's needed, about a deeply heartfelt issue, people want to instead question the motivations of their opponent. They'll say, well, he doesn't care about working people, or he doesn't respect women's rights, or something like that, where it's more about trying to look inside of someone's heart and as though you know what their deeply held personal motivations are. Let's keep it up here at the ideas level, and talk about those ideas. Debate whether they're good or not for the state of Ohio. And again, it doesn't have to be something with no emotion. It's good that people bring emotion to this realm of public policy, because what we're talking about is laws that will impact every Ohioan, impact the way our citizens run their businesses, impact the way our schools operate. And it should be something that we have emotion about, but we shouldn't have animosity toward one another about it. That's the difference. We can have high emotions and we can debate ideas and we can, and sometimes those can be heated debates, but we should be able to respect one another and still like one another as human beings at the end of the conversation. And to me, that's the ideal of statesmanship or stateswomanship. It's how we do it.
So there's a difference between I believe you're mistaken and you're a jerk.
Absolutely.
Same question, George. What's the substance of civil discourse to you, and how do you try to get somebody involved at a productive, meaningful level when they seem to be going down that other path?
Well, as you, as a former mediator, you know.
Oh, I'm still doing it.
There's two sides to every coin. You know, you take a quarter out, and you have to come together and meet in the middle. And that's where the word is compromise comes together, which the Republicans don't want to do. So it's awful tough. You can talk civil, you can talk heated, and when your heart's not in it, it's not going to happen. So you know, I've been with Frank here several times, debating probably 6-7 times in life. I don't happen to think he's that way, maybe, but I do happen to think that sometimes when he gets the call from the governor, you know, his horns come out. So it's tough when the other side just flat refuses to.
How would you try to engage him in productive conversation then?
I think that would be pretty easy. It's just when the outside pressures come, sometimes I think he gives in a little too quick.
Okay. Follow-up question, how would you react if your party or a member of your party ran political ads or made political statements or made accusations that you had good reason to believe were simply untrue, and especially if they seemed to be attacking or mudslinging as opposed to substantial issues? Would you ever say something publicly about that? Would you ever say something privately to that other candidate? And have you ever been accused of doing anything of that sort? There's a load. There's a load for you.
You know, transparency, the truth always comes out in the end. So, you know, I don't worry too much about that. You try to live your life as clean and reasonable as you can, and I'm not too concerned about that. I think this campaign for the Senate race here has been pretty clean, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Was you talking about the other party bringing something up?
I would extend that to any other candidate for any other office. It doesn't have to be your esteemed opponent here. It can be anybody.
But I just don't think you can worry about it. And yeah, I might say something, but the truth will come out in the end.
Okay, thank you. Any comment about that, Frank?
Yeah, too much effort is put into trying to make the other guy look bad instead of trying to tell people why they should vote for you. But the problem with this is, and you can ask a political science professor, you can ask a psychologist, it's a thing called the negativity bias. At least that's what I've heard it referred to as. And I think the radio thing I was listening to about this traces it back to human evolution. Our minds are sort of wired to remember bad information a lot more distinctly than good information. And you can imagine why our ancient ancestors would want to know this is where the tigers are versus that's where the good places to pick berries are. One of those things is going to stick in your head a lot more succinctly. And so the fact is, you can run $100,000 worth of television ads that tell people what a bum your opponent is, and then run a poll, and you'll see that that was pretty effective. And then you could run $300,000 worth of ads that tell your constituents what a great person you are and how you're going to serve the district and that kind of thing. And chances are you will find that the impact of 3 times as much advertising, which is positive, is often not as sunk in. And it's just it's a numbers thing. And so as candidates, each of us has to try to hold to a higher standard. I think that you have things that are on the table and things that aren't on the table, and each person makes their own decisions about what they're willing to accept and what they're not willing to accept. For me, someone's family, someone's personal life, not on the table. Someone's policy positions, their stated, quoted, footnoted policy positions that are verifiable and not taken out of context, and that's a fair thing for compare and contrast. Cartoonish caricatures of your opponent, not acceptable. Photoshopped images of your opponent, not acceptable. And that's where I am on those things. Be fair. You can compare and contrast yourself to your opponent, but be fair about it. The scary thing is that as a candidate, there are times that you are not in control of what is said on your behalf. And this is one where I've had to speak up when the Ohio Republican Party thought they were doing me a favor, and they ran a nasty mailer, and I thought it was over the line, and I told them so. And of course, it was already out in 50,000 mailboxes at that point, so there's not too much you can do about it other than say, this does not represent me. I don't support this kind of thing, and to say so publicly, which I did. It's a component of the modern political landscape that different groups are able to, anybody sitting here, if you were inspired to go out and raise some money to run an ad and try to tell people that the sky's not blue, it's legal under the First Amendment for you to be able to do so. And so us as candidates, when someone does, some outside group that we're legally not allowed to communicate with or have an influence on, does something that crosses that line, then you need to say so.
Okay. If you go down to Columbus to do this job, I know that there will be many agendas crossing your table, crossing your desk. I'd like to know if you have a priority item or items that you really, really want to do. Do you have a mission that when I go to Columbus, this is what I hope to work for on behalf of my constituents? Would you take that?
Yeah, first priority and job one since I was elected in 2010 to my first term was a pretty clear mission that we were given by the people of Ohio, and that is we want to see a recovering economy in our state. We want to see more job opportunities and opportunities for everybody, for all Ohioans, and so that to me is the first priority, and to me that's done through private sector growth and development. We as a state can create that fertile ground where businesses can thrive and grow an enterprise and put people to work so that families can have the jobs they need to provide the lifestyle they want. That does not mean that a pro-business climate in our state is not pro-worker as well. And that's why I oppose things such as so-called right to work and efforts to try to weaken organized labor through things like that. The fact is we can have a recovery in Ohio that brings everybody along, and that's my first priority. And part of that means investing in things like education and infrastructure, public safety, basic things that government is responsible for. A second priority for me is something that I've been working on since I first got down there, and I believe that we're going to be able to get something done on this, and that's changing the way that district lines are drawn. Everybody's heard the term gerrymandering before. It's actually should be pronounced gerrymandering because it was named after Governor of New York, Elbridge Gerry, or of Massachusetts rather, Elbridge Gerry, who did it for the first time 200 years ago in 1812. And it's gotten worse. With modern computer technology, we can draw maps that are pretty ridiculous, and they're done for political expediency. And anybody that tells you otherwise is misleading you. Both parties engage in it when they have the opportunity to. And we've got a system in Ohio where it's sort of a winner-take-all proposition. When the Republicans are lucky enough to be in charge, they get to draw lines with impunity. And when the Democrats are in charge, they get to draw lines with impunity. And usually, surprise, surprise, the lines that they draw benefit them politically. That's not in the best interest of democracy. It's not what's good for Ohio. And we need to change that system. And we've got a bipartisan proposal in the Senate that passed the Senate 2 years ago with an overwhelming vote, and then died in the House. And hopefully we can bring the House along soon. And I think that we can have something on the 2015 ballot, because it would have to be a constitutional amendment that all of you would get the chance to think about and decide if we were doing the right thing with this amendment or not. And that's probably my next priority after job growth and economic development.
Okay.
Here we are 32 years later, and we're still talking about job development. We didn't do a damn thing about it. It's just been all, word of mouth. Nobody done that. This time we got to do something. It's really tough to look a guy at 55, 56 years old and look him in the eye and say, well, you're not going back in the plant. We're going to have to retrain. I mean, he's not really excited about doing that. But that's where the emphasis has got to be. And then probably after that is fixing this unconstitutional school funding thing that's been going on since the early 90s. And this administration has no desire to tackle that whatsoever. So that's where persistence comes in, where I have to go down there and change it.
Okay, now I asked you that question so that I could ask you this question. And I'm going to apologize up front, because there's no way to ask this question without appearing at least to be insulting, and I certainly don't intend to insult anyone. But politicians make promises. And I always remember the words of that famous politician, Nikita Khrushchev, who said that politicians are the same everywhere. And he said politicians promise to build a bridge even where there is no river. And that's the stereotype, that's the mudslinging that people do against politicians. They think that you guys will promise us anything just to get elected. And my question is, have you ever done this? Has anyone ever accused you of doing this? How do you make good on your promises?
Well, I haven't promised anybody anything. I guess chicken in every pot would be a good, I have, here's the deal. If I can't get those 3 issues done that I want to get done, and get these bills put together and get them on the floor for a vote, I want to see where everybody stands. Warren Buffett says you don't know who's swimming naked till the tide goes out. I want to see, Frank could tell us, yeah, I won't vote for right to work. I want to see that bill getting out on the floor and just see where he does stand when the heat comes. But I'll tell you this, if I can't get a vote on those 3 issues, I'm not going to run again. Because I'm not going down there for a paycheck. I'm going down there to get something done. And if we can't get a vote on these bills, I'm not coming back. Because these are important issues to this district and the state of Ohio. And have you heard anybody talk about minimum wage raise in this state? Nobody. It's just a shame. We built this state for the wealthy. By God, we're going to give these wealthy people a tax break, and it'll all trickle down. It's just, I don't see them doing anything for the average working man in this state. And this has got to stop.
And that's your promise, and you're by God sticking to it?
I'm sticking to it.
Absolutely, okay. Frank, same question, and my apologies in advance. Have you ever promised anything or that you didn't really think that you could come through on?
No, and that's why I don't make promises. Candidly, I think that the only promise that you should make as an elected office holder is your oath of office, to uphold the Constitution and the laws of our state, to and perhaps to be forthright with the people that you serve, because one member of the state Senate, one member of the state House, can try to get some things done and can really make a difference. That's why I'm doing this. I know that's why George wants to do it, because we want to serve, and it's not for a paycheck. It's for the desire to try to make our state a better place to live and work and to raise a family. But ultimately, it's a group effort. And so don't make promises as one member out of 33, because you don't get your own will in a legislature. It's a collaborative process by its very nature. And so, you do the best you can. You try to be, you're forthright and you're honest with the people that you serve. That's why these pledges, I think, are a terrible thing. These sign this pledge that you'll never raise taxes, or sign this pledge that you'll never do this or always do that. That to me is abdication of your leadership. It's not, it's not the way that you want your state legislators or executives or anyone else in any position of authority. It's like a judge determining the case before he or she's heard the witnesses. We have people that come down and testify before us in committees that are very learned people that may have opinions that are different from mine, but they're not invalid. And so I'm not going to determine how I'm going to vote on something till I've heard all the sides of the argument. And so that's why, these pledges and promises and ironclad things like that are, I think, foolishness.
Do you think there are certain people in your constituency or in your party who want you to make promises like that?
Sure.
And I'll ask you that in a moment.
Yeah, no, I think so. There's the, I've gotten that question, for example, why didn't you sign the No New Taxes pledge? Well, first of all, you can look at my background now. Having served for the last 4 years, I've voted repeatedly in favor of tax cuts, and on some I've urged some caution from some of my colleagues and tried to find some middle ground on things. I think that government should take the minimum out of your pocket that they can in order to run government efficiently. And I'm generally somebody that doesn't believe that high taxes make for a prosperous economy or a prosperous state. But at the same time, I don't know what the next 4 years holds, a major catastrophe, natural disaster or otherwise, that would cause us to have to do something to quickly bring revenue into the state's coffers. And so that's why I wouldn't sign a pledge like that, put my sacred honor on the line to say I'd never do something. And that's the explanation I've given to people when they ask me, why didn't you sign the No New Taxes pledge? Because 99 times out of 100, I'm not going to vote for new taxes, but you know what? Sometimes that 1 in 100 comes up.
Okay, thank you. Do you feel those pressures to make promises?
No, I don't have that problem. I'm a Democrat. That's a Republican thing that they sign these Norbert, I can't even remember his last name. He comes in there, he makes them all sign it, and they all sign it, but we don't do this.
I'm wondering about who's pressuring you.
Nobody's pressuring me.
And I try not to be naive. I gotta believe if you're running for office, somebody wants to get a promise out of you.
It has not happened. So that's my story.
And if it should?
No, I'm only going to work for the citizens of this district.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to work for.
Let me move on to the next section of this and ask kind of an extension on something that we asked during the opening introduction. What accomplishments are you most proud of that would possibly make you a good candidate or a good office holder?
what I have accomplished. Yeah, I would say when, as I stated before, the passage of the Public Employees Collective Bargaining Bill. I don't know if any of you remember before that happened, we had strikes, firefighters, police. I mean, this state was, when that happened, was wild, wild west. And those things stopped. We got the cost under control, and it was just it really settled the state down to where you could come in and count on things, and your snow is going to get removed, your fires are going to get put out. EMS, it just totally expanded after that. This is not a bad state to have a heart attack in. I hate to tell you that, but you're going to get somebody there within 3 minutes, and you're going to get a qualified paramedic that's going to do CPR or start a line on you or something. I've seen it happen. I mean, when I first come on in the 60s, they went out there with a little inhalator and put some oxygen. Since the collective bargaining bill is, they are putting very good qualified people on the streets that are saving lives every day in this state. That's probably, like I say, we only had a 2-year period to do that. And I worked on that full time, and I'm losing my voice.
Have some water.
That's probably my biggest accomplishment.
Collective bargaining.
And, but it had not just for raises and things like that. It was working conditions, and the workers had a voice into putting very good qualified people on the street, and that it helped this state out immensely.
Okay, thank you. Frank, what are you most proud of?
I guess I'd have to say the thing I'm most proud of, or my the most important thing in my life, is my family. I've got 2 beautiful little girls and a wife that, and it's reminded me, having become a father in the last 3 years, what this whole public service thing's all about. It's about every generation's made this state a little bit better than the one before, and passed it on a little bit better than they found it, and I'll be darned if my generation's going to let that torch go out. And so, making sure that we leave a better state behind. I'm proud of the upbringing I had in this community, learning that work ethic that I was taught working on a farm, and proud of being involved in a great organization like the Boy Scouts, and having served in the armed forces, including serving in combat a couple times, and that's something that I'll always look back on. But for me, it's more about what's ahead. It's not about what I've done; it's about what I'm going to do. And I am someone who sincerely believes in serving others, and that's why I've sought this current role, and that's why I'd like to be able to do it for another 4 years.
What do you think you've learned from your mess-ups, your mistakes that really left you better than before, even though it might have been a hard lesson?
Yeah, I've used this line with the folks that work with me down in Columbus in my office. I've said, make any mistake you want, just don't make the same mistake twice. Meaning that if we're doing the right thing, we learn from our mistakes. When you make a mistake, that's probably because you were striving and maybe hanging it out there a little bit and working to try to get something accomplished. If it's a mistake of sloppiness, that's a different matter. But if it's a mistake that you made because you were trying to do the right thing, then I'm never going to fault you for it. One of the things that I've learned is that sometimes people take the enormously complex work that we do in the state legislature and they try to oversimplify it. They may ignore hours and hours of committee testimony and an amendment process and the tug and pull, the compromise that does go on to try to get a piece of legislation passed. And they may just look at the yes votes and the no votes, which is a vast oversimplification of the process. So I think that's a lesson I've learned, is to try to communicate as openly as I can with the people that I represent, but at the same time, don't make a commitment to how you're going to vote on something until you've heard all the facts, until you've tried to do the best you can to make it a better piece of legislation.
Okay, thank you. You ever mess anything up? That you learned something, came away and said, yeah, I learned something from that?
Yeah, several times.
Me too, but I'm not talking about it.
One time in my earlier career as a negotiator, I really pissed off a mediator, and I learned my lesson.
That's good.
No, you can't.
I approve.
You can't let your mouth run away with your head. You know, it's you gotta. Yeah, that was probably my biggest. How I dealt with. I was awful young then, and how you dealt with authority and city council members when you went in to talk to them. And you know, as I went around the state, probably 90% of the mayors or the city councils or the township trustees are very good people. They were just outstanding to work with. And you know, they sometimes didn't get along with the local people, but they were good-hearted, and I very rarely ran into anybody that just was outright trying to get you. And it's, but as I said early on, sometimes I was on the wrong side of things. So I learned.
Well, I want to thank both of you gentlemen, and I hope that it hasn't been too much of a disappointment not to see these guys fight with each other, because at the outset our plan was not to have them fight with each other, but to have them talk with each other and talk to you. I know, what a concept. We do have a few minutes left over. We do, don't we? Yeah. Okay. What I thought we would do, unless you've got a different idea, is you are here, and it's your district that we're talking about. And Jesus, I haven't even put up the invitation. I would.
Who wants to go first?
I would like to invite a few questions.
I would like to ask either of you gentlemen if you would support a legislature to prevent public employees like teachers, firefighters, so on and so forth, make strikes illegal. Please give me a simple yes or no.
Absolutely not, no. Would not support something like that.
Strikes are illegal right now for police and fire. They are for teachers, and I could go back to 1984 and tell you what had happened, but it's a very boring story. But no, I don't think, I've been through strikes. I don't want to go through it again. And I think you're absolutely right, it should be legal. But there's a very good outcome to come. You know, if you go to binding arbitration, you bring a third party in and look at both sides. And
Yeah, I wouldn't support changing the law and making it illegal for people to strike that are currently able to.
Okay. Does that answer your question adequately?
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if you can answer this. I would like you to think about it. As we look at things happening in the world right now, in Ohio and around the country, and around the world really, I feel very strongly that most of our leaders keep looking backwards in terms of how they would approach new problems that I don't think we have old answers to. You know, if we're talking about global warming, if we're talking about an economy that will never move along the way it did after World War II up till now, if we're talking about we can't afford to get educated anymore. We have so many people that are living on minimum wage in this country and work full-time and can't pay their bills. And the answers we mostly get talk about what did we do 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 80 years ago, but they don't talk about we've got new conditions. Maybe we need new ideas. Maybe we need to restate the problems instead of constantly referring back to things that just aren't relevant anymore. And I would, it's not a good question. So my question is, for both of you, how can we think that you're at least open to the idea that I don't want to hear something that somebody said worked when everything about the world was different than it is today. I'd like to hear about what are we going to do now with the problems we have now and the conditions we have now.
Would you like me to go first, or?
Go ahead.
First of all, I mean, I think that there's important lessons we can learn from the past, and so I know that's not what you're saying. We learn from the past and educate ourselves based on historical precedent and that kind of thing. But the fact is that for us to solve problems, we have to benefit from all of the ideas that are brought to the table. And that's that whole concern I've got with this partisan divide, is that we cut off half of the good ideas potentially when we're not willing to work across the aisle. And so I think that meeting in the middle, that compromise process, that's how we can work to bring new creative ideas to things. And then I think that there's also something to be said about the diversity within our legislature. It's important to have a diverse legislature, not only ethnically and religiously and everything else, but age-wise as well. And the good news is we've got I think a good mix. There's 6 of us in the Senate that are in our 30s. We've got a good group that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s as well. And so we can all learn from each other in that. I think it's important that we have that. I think that's why it's important to have not only senior, more experienced individuals, but also some younger people serving in legislative offices as well.
You did mention minimum wage, which is one of my, you're absolutely right. 16 states have raised minimum wage in the last couple of years, and every one of them have seen job growth. My plan is to raise it 80 cents for the next 3 years, and we're going to get to $10.40. Now, everyone says, you're going to, when you phase it in like that, and I got this from the Clinton Initiative, every time you've done that, you've created jobs. 57% of the people on minimum wage right now are women, and nearly half of them are single mothers. We could pull people out of poverty just by giving them a raise, and it would lower our taxes. But that's one thing. The minimum wage must be raised in this state if we're going to, or we're going to be a third world country.
How you guys doing? Frank, I got a little bit of a disagreement with you on your Senate Bill 5 issue. You came to our labor hall in Akron and said that you would not support SB 5, when in fact you went back down to Columbus and voted for it. SB 5 and the contents thereof devastated the state with local government fund cuts. Now the governor has moved the tax burden from the rich to the working class. Taxes have been shifted to our backs instead of the rich. I got a 2-part question here. One, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with a little steel factory in Ormet, Ohio. AEP raised their power rates on them for a while. They went to the governor's office to see if Kasich would come out and talk to them. He would not even address them. They got a petition, got 11, got 2 signatures for every person that worked there. Nobody to this day has went to Ormet to deal with those workers or to talk to them, the best of my knowledge. How would you guys go to the governor, go to your own party, and try and accomplish things? And I agree with what George said with the supermajority. I don't foresee that as happening because of the fact one party is saying no all the time and the other side saying yes. And secondly, the second part of that question is with right to work. Those 2 bills are sitting in the House right now. So you're telling me right here today you will vote no on House Bill 151 and House Bill 152 if they are presented. Because it's not, and we can all talk about who's going to present them. We can say, well, I didn't push that bill out, but that bill is going to come out right after this election. I'm well aware of that fact. So Are you going to work vehemently against that right to work? Because that is aimed at one thing, devastating the unions in the state. And they tried it in 2011 under SB 5 Issue 2, and we sent a clear message to Columbus with 1.3 million signatures. We don't want to hear about trying to get rid of unions. Working class families, middle class families are those working class. And if you get rid of the unions, you've done wiped out that whole middle class. So can you please answer those?
I guess both those questions are directed at me, but the first point that you were making about the process was something that I talked about a little bit earlier, and obviously there are a number of things that you brought up just now. So one thing that I would say is that I'm going to be as brief as I can be here because there's a lot of other folks who want to ask questions, but I do these office hours every month. I've done them 50 times. I mean, every county I serve, come in and talk to me, or let's talk after this, because sometimes there's a lot more to the story. And when I talked about how I had learned sometimes that people don't always hear what you're saying, but sometimes hear what they want to hear, some of that was what was going on with that. I was trying to find some middle ground on this. I said I opposed this thing from the beginning because of some major problems that it contained. I was able to work to get 99 pages of changes made to that bill. I recognize that in the minds of a lot of people, it didn't make it that much better, but there were some real things that I was able to kind of drag it a little bit closer toward the center, and by dragging it closer to the center, that cost me my yes vote. And I thought that was sort of part of my job to try to make legislation better, and then once I got what I could get, then to try to be part of the process. Regarding right to work, I've always been very very clearly spoken on this one. I think that it's an overreach. I think that it is not the solution to anything that ails Ohio. I also don't think that the bills are going to go anywhere. I know that you do. I'd bet you a dinner on that. I just don't think that there's any interest in moving those outside of a fringe element of some folks within my own party that believe that that's sort of a panacea to fix our state's economy. Most of the rest of us don't believe that that's the case, and I've always been very very plain spoken on this one. I don't think that that's good for the families of Ohio to take away their ability effectively to be part of an organized union in their workplace, and so I would absolutely vote against those pieces of legislation because they're not in the best interest of Ohioans.
Do you think you need to answer that question, or do you think you've already answered it?
No, I'll answer it.
Okay.
Frank's not the only one who outright lied to us. Karen Gilmore came to the first district.
Right up until this moment, we've been pretty civil.
Okay, well, I just want to tell, this is civil, I'm telling the truth. Karen Gilmore came to the first district firefighters meeting and promised the firefighters, Marion, DeCyrus, Finley, Mansfield, all that. She would never vote for that. She voted for it, and she resigned 2 months later and got a nice job. The governor took care of her and put her on the industrial commission. So they can tell you anything. It's like I said, Warren Buffett says we don't know who's swimming naked till the tide comes out. We want to see a vote because those bills are going to come out. They'll pass the House, guarantee you. We'll see what happens in the Senate.
Hey, gentlemen. I have questions a little different, but it kind of builds off of what Frank was just talking about. And my understanding of politics is that sometimes you have to vote for things even though you don't think it's 100% great. We understand that. But I do think there's a difference when you put pen to paper and you actually write something. You sponsor something, even co-sponsoring something. That to me is a little more different. It kind of talks about your character, talks about your long-term view of what you stand for. Frank, you wrote two things. In 2013, you wrote something that prohibited an audit of Jobs Ohio. And this year you did a piece that basically allowed campus credit for off-campus religious schooling. I'm not saying that I agree or disagree with anything in that, but those two things obviously meant something to you to write them. Would you talk briefly about why those things are part of your character? And then Mr. Rosiska, what are two things that would move you to put pen to paper? Briefly, what are two things that, like, literally you would write? What would you write? Thanks very much.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think maybe there's a confusion because those are not bills that I sponsored. I voted in favor of them, but I didn't sponsor either of those pieces of legislation. I've got concerns that we need to do more on the auditing piece on Jobs Ohio. There is if there's a mistake on the state website, we'll have to make sure that gets fixed. But the question was, do we want to do something different from what was being done in the past as it relates to the State Department of Development and how we do job attraction and job creation in our state? And the consensus was that in order to have an economic development entity that's really going to be able to attract jobs to our state, we have to be able to protect proprietary information until the negotiations are finished and that kind of thing. But anything that can be written can be made better. And I think that there are some things there that could be made better as well, whether it's inspector general kind of individual that has the ability to be an unbiased individual that can look into that and problem solve and troubleshoot and that kind of thing. The deal with religious education off school campuses, it's something that's being done in a lot of places already. What it simply allows for is, instead of taking study hall or whatever else, if there is an offering of some sort of a faith-based education thing, you can get school credits for it. It doesn't replace any of the required core curriculum in the state, but it functions as a elective, basically, and for families that maybe can't afford private school but do want their children to have some of that religious training, if that's their faith set, then I see no reason why you should be required to take phys ed or basket weaving or whatever else when maybe the elective that you want to take is something that pertains to your faith.
My bad on the correctness.
Yeah. No, it's all right.
Two things I would do. First thing would be minimum wage. I would do my plan on the minimum wage of the 80 cents. Somehow, some way, the minimum wage is $7.95 in Ohio, and it goes up. Like 2 years ago, it went up 10 cents, and last year it went up 5 cents. For the life of me, I don't know who the minimum wage god is that raises these, but it makes no sense. It's not even 1%, so I don't know if it's half the cost of living or what it is. But that would be the first thing. And second thing would be the job development. I got a plan that I would form a little alliance with business, organized labor, and educators. And unfortunately, I think Sherrod Brown, who I grew up with, he's from Mansfield, he just introduced something similar in the federal. So I think maybe he stole my idea, but I'm not sure. But that would be one thing that we'd have to do, is to get the educators in there to get with business to find out what they need in a certain area. And hopefully that's two things I could get done quickly.
One of the signs of the good campaign is that we've got more questions than we've got time for. So we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to break and let everyone go to your homes.
You both expressed interest in improving education for the students of Ohio. Do you feel that Common Core standards will help in that endeavor?
Common Core.
Yes, I do. I was on the school board for 2.5 years, and what this is done, and everyone thinks this came from the federal government, and Obama put this. No, it didn't. These states got together. I think there was 16 of them at the start. Now there's 45, and we're raising standards and trying to standardize everything in the United States, and I think it's a good thing. It's going to create some more teacher job development development, but I think it's a good thing.
Okay, thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I think that there's value in having a uniform set of standards, and that's what the National Governors Association was aiming at when they got together to create the Common Core standards. There is unfortunately a lot of misinformation, it seems, as it relates to this issue as well, and there are also some legitimate concerns that people have. I've had moms come in, and dads, but a number of moms that have come in to visit with me during my office hours that I have every month, and they've said, look, Common Core is trying to teach our kids this, and this about history, revisionist history or whatever else. And it's simply not the case, because Common Core in Ohio is only language arts and mathematics at this point. It's important to draw that distinction between curriculum and standards. Standards, a national set of standards such as Common Core is, I think, laudable. But curriculum is still a local priority. And curriculum should not be dictated from Washington or from Columbus. It's a local matter. Now, there's guidelines that can be set and everything else. But what works in Appalachian, Ohio may not work in downtown Akron. And so I support the notion of Common Core, but anything that can be done can be improved upon over time. I would not support sort of wholesale throwing it out. I think that would be a lot of wasted effort. And I've said, I've almost quipped that if we were to repeal Common Core, I think that we would end up replacing it with something that looked a whole lot like Common Core, just wasn't called that. And that's a fool's errand as far as I'm concerned. One thing that is a problem, though, is this over-reliance on testing. We have highly skilled professional teachers that devote their lives to enriching young minds. And here these individuals find themselves just having to, in too many cases, to teach kids how to regurgitate answers on a bubble form, when in actuality they need to be developing creative thinkers, independent thinkers, people that know how to do their own research and not just sort of arrive at the right answer, but how to ask the right questions. And we've gone test crazy, not only in Ohio but in the United States, and I think it's to our detriment. We have to have accountability. We have to know how the progress is being made, but enough with the testing.
Okay. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for a most interesting and informative evening, and all of you for your participation and your questions. Lou, do you need to say anything in closing?
This time I'll use the mic. I think it works. I want to thank everybody for coming. We have one more thing to do that I hope you'll all participate in. I've noticed, and I talked about it a little bit when we sang the Star Spangled Banner. There's another song that I particularly like that Cantor Rosenman is going to lead us in, which sets a different tone than what I think the Star Spangled Banner does sometimes. So, Cantor?
I'm singing two verses to this song, and it's a song that we all know, America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains, majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet, whose stern impassioned stress a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty